We can continue now, and I'm very happy to invite Renny Amundsen, directly from Holmenkollen, with no skis and Norwegian flag today, but an interesting subject to continue Clementina's presentation, which was about the standardization and the competence description, and now how to use the certification. So there are different possibilities for certification on the basis of ECF, but EUCIP is widely spread. What it is, how much it's used, it's Renny talking about it. Renny has a long history in IT industry from 1975. So, and I think the valuable experience is that he has seen it from all the sides, as working in the industry, as a CEO of a company, as a lecturer in a university, and now as the CEO from the third sector, the Norwegian Computer Society. So, please.
Yeah, that was a very nice introduction. And of course, yes, we are very excited about the the World Championship. It proves that Norwegians are born with their skis on. And thank you also for the invitation. I'm also honored, like Clementina. And this is my first time in Estonia, in Tallinn as well. And I'm really impressed. A very interesting city, with a country with a very interesting history. And those who would like to read about my experience can find my blog, and I have already posted about my day in Tallinn. But then back to the subject, EUCIP for competence and career planning in Norway. Let me start to say that we really recognize and support Clementina's job and this development of ECF, and I will get back to how we EUCIP will align with that later on. There we are. Yes, I have a long career in the field of IT. But now I'm working in and for Norwegian Computer Society. They have established an own company, 100% owned by the Norwegian Computer Society. And the company's name is EUCIP Norge, where I am the CEO. Let me tell you a little bit about the table of contents and what I would like to address. I will try to focus on how to define, describe, and measure IT professionals, and the competence based on this international framework. And I would like to emphasize on how this can be beneficial for customers, employers, and how learning providers can fill the competence gap. And then I guess I addressed all kinds of guests here today. Why do we do this in Norway, and especially why do we do this for our members of the Norwegian Computer Society? The Norwegian Computer Society has approximately 12,000 members. So I will try to answer why do IT professionals need an international vendor program and neutral certificate, and why EUCIP competence scheme is useful as such. I will tell a little bit about the certification process and the beneficial of having international IT professional certification standard. Why do we do it? Yeah, well, mainly because we think it's important to recognize, document, and protect industry competence and skill standards for IT professionals. There is a need of a standard to describe and measure, compare IT professional competence. I think some of the subjects today have raised that question. And there is a need of a goal-oriented training plans and stimulate professional career planning and development. How do we do it? Well, we promote knowledge of the EUCIP standard within the media and public authorities. We create enthusiasm for EUCIP as a general competence standard. And we assist recognized educational institutions in developing EUCIP training programs. So I will show how EUCIP framework can be used to specify for learning providers, for example, what kind of courses and subject the professional needs. This you have seen before. Still presented it. This is the whole EUCIP framework, and I will just emphasize on some details. So let's start with what we call EUCIP core level. And here you have 3 modules. And if you remember the ECF, they have 5 modules. But what we will do, and that is very easy to do actually, is that we will divide our 3 modules into 5. So there isn't a very big difference between ECF and EUCIP from the beginning, but we divide it into 3, which is planning, building and operate an IT system. And you see the subject and more explanation there. Some ask what is the level, what is the demand, what is the challenge to be able to hold the certificate of a EUCIP core level, because there is one multiple choice test to each of these 3 modules. It is estimated to typical 400 hours of study time. That means 400 hours if you don't know anything about the subject. And it is compulsory to pass these 3 tests to go to the next level. I will come back to that later. So we are talking about building these subjects around a nice information system life cycle, like plan, and there are 7 subjects. Build, where there are 4 subjects, and operate, where there are 7 subjects. So this is the syllabus of EUCIP core level, and describe in detail what's required for the skills. And this can be used as a syllabus when you develop courses and studies. I have talked quite a lot about EUCIP for universities and college universities in Norway as well. And for typical IT studies, this will normally be the subject that you require for the first year of a 3-year of bachelor. If you like to know a little bit about the requirement of these tests, there is already a core level sample test on the net. You will find it if you go to eucip.org. There you will see how we question and what we require. So this is open for everyone if they like to try. When you have finished the test, let me emphasize that the pass mark is 60%. You will have the percentage of the right and wrong from each of the subjects. So this is an example of a core level test in plan, where there are 7 subjects. There are learning providers active in this. In Norway, the most known one, I guess, is TCIP, which is a learning provider who make courses and books in the field of IT and e-learning especially. They have made and write core level books for each modules in Norwegian, for those who want an introduction. And there is also e-learning courses for these 3 modules. So learning providers are active in Norway according to especially EUCIP core level. I think I would like to emphasize that EUCIP mission and goal is to measure competence. And we put out the requirements in syllabuses so that we have a way to measure that competence. And for me, I feel it's important to diversify from being a company that, or an organization that measure. Learning providers is another thing, and we shouldn't mix that, I think. But that is my subject feeling. So learning providers should be free, they should have the syllabus, and they should make the learning materials, books, e-learning studies, and other things. Because EUCIP's competence is not in learning, it is in defining requirements of skills. But we live happily together, of course. Okay, then we are finished with core level, and let's see a little bit about the rest of the framework, especially when it comes to comparedness to the ECF. Both Clementina and the others have been saying that there are 21 profiles. This vocational structure is based on what you call in industrial structure modules. And many European framework, whatever you call them, is based on the same. I think you, Clementina, mentioned Sophia, for example, from UK. It's based on the same. I said that typically 400 study hours for core level, and you can compare that with 800 hours study for professional levels. So that means approximately 1 year of study on bachelor level, I guess, if you take these two together. Would that be correct? There is some study hours here means both lecturing and self-study. So we are talking about approximately a semester, I guess. Then how can you use these profile definitions, and in practical, how is it used in Norway? Why do we need a standard, and how could it be operated? I show you one of the 24 profiles and give examples from that. And I have chosen to take the profile Information System Project Manager. If I ask you around here in the room to tell me, for you, what is an IS project manager? And I guess that I would have, how many do we have a person here today? Approximately 100 persons. We will have more or less 100 different answers. Not very different, but in some way different on requirements and levels. And that is why we need a standard. And if you now compare how we describe a profile in EUCIP with Clementina's presentation, you will find there is a lot of similarities here. And Clementina problematized about whether it is good to have a profile or whether it's good to have a framework, so to speak. I think you need both, and you showed also the mapping between them. So first of all, you have a short description so that everyone knows what we are talking about. And this is description of an Information System Project Manager in EUCIP. Noticed also at the bottom that we're talking about work experience. And for this profile, it's required for 48 months. That varies from profile to profile. But one thing which is special for EUCIP compared to other certificates in the market, most of them vendors like Microsoft, Oracle, Cisco. We required experience, and we also measure the experience of time. So that is where we diversify a little bit, and I'll go back to more details later about that. There is a task overview, and what is that useful for? Well, it's an example of what kind of task a project manager could be exposed to, so to speak. Another use for this is that an employee who we would like to hire and make it advertisement in the newspaper saying, I would like to have a project manager, what kind of skills and what kind of tasks am I requiring for? And you can look at this like a buffet and pick the task which is applicable for you. You don't need to pick all of them, but you can pick some of them. I think I give you another example of how EUCIP framework is used in Norway based on this. I had a telephone call a couple of years ago. There was a person who was asked from the manager to build a new department in a big Norwegian consultancy company. And the department should have the role of a sales support. And he called me and said, Renny, it looks to me that one of your profiles, which is IS architect, fits very well into the definition of what my manager have told me to define as a new department in our organization. And he asked me to come and discuss this with him. So what he do now is to build a new department in the consultant company, which originally was called sales support. And what we do is to pick tasks from this buffet. And he said it was very good to have a references or a standard, because he said that most of these tasks is relevant for us, but also, he said, one of the tasks that was mentioned in the IS architect list was testing. And it said it's very important that we emphasize in our organization that this department does not test. There is another department in our organization to do the software testing. So that is an example of how good it is to have a standard, both to include or exclude, if you like to be very specific of what kind of services you get from a department. That's another good use of a framework. Then something special for EUCIP as well. We require and we measure essential behavior skills. And I think that is a good contribution, although it's a little bit difficult or comprehensive. But of course, you need different kinds of behavior skills depending on what kind of profession or profile you're working in. If I may be a little bit humoristic maybe, so please don't take my word exactly how I say it. If you are an IT trainer, you need pedagogical competence. If you are a software developer, you need more like squared mind. Quite different from an IT trainer. That doesn't mean that one of the person compared to another is better or worse, but they have different behavioral skills, which is important to measure. And if you take a senior profile, let's say a business analyst, you need to be able to talk to the management. You need to be able to understand and how to build a business plan. You need to be able to speak their language. And that is essential. Let's say back to the project manager. I think one of the most important things for a project manager is to cope with the resistance of the change. You can very often say that an IT project is an organizational project more than an IT itself. And for example, to be able to motivate people, it's important for a project manager and maybe less important for the software developer, if you don't misunderstand. I will get back to how we measure behavior skills afterwards. Then, not the least but the last, or vice versa, we have a list of detailed competence skills required. I won't go into details here, but these are what you in EUCIP call competence groups and competence elements. And I will tell you later that we use a self-assessment. That was something that Clementina was mentioning as well, how we have developed a self-assessment tool based on this framework. And then you are asked how you assess yourself according to these deep competence skills. And there is a very interesting use of it as well. So after you have made this self-assessment, you will be aware of that you are capable of, or you have these skills, or you don't have these skills. And when you go then to the learning providers and say that this and this and these skills is what I miss, it's more easy for them to make a course or a program, whatever, based on the definitions and the references of the competence group, like integration management, and these bullet points below that, which are what we call in EUCIP competence elements. I won't go into details here, just use this to emphasize, like I have said before, what EUCIP will do is to align and adopt the ECF framework. And I think that is very important. It is not useful to have a standard if it isn't an industrial standard. And there is so much similarity between ECF and EUCIP, so we should align, and we will do that. There is some people from CEPIS, including myself, who is active in these SEN groups. Clementina mentioned, for example, the SEN groups of workshop of ACT skills, where the project of defining the job profiles are mentioned. So there's alignments here. Okay. Let me then tell you how we measure and examine and certify on professional level. Then you have to pass the 3 tests in core level first, that is compulsory. And what you do as a candidate is that you fill out an application, which includes an application for a CV, and we recommend Europass because this is an international or European standard. You list a portfolio of your what you have been doing, your work experience during this time. Then you make a competence cover map, and I won't go into details, but then you map to these deep competence skills references. This application is going to a pre-qualification, and there is a system of how to how do you say that, how to get EUCIP points for each of the components in the application form. So there we measure education, of course, and with education I mean formal education. We recognize certificates. That means that other certificates like Microsoft, Cisco, ITIL, and all the others are mapped into EUCIP framework, so that we give you recognition for your competence for projects, for example. So if you apply for project manager, you will, or maybe I should say, give another example, network manager, you will have recognition for having a Cisco certificate. And then experience is important. And then the most important things compared to this, what I said was behavioral skills. We have an oral exam. It's an exam over approximately 45 minutes, and the first 15 minutes the candidate present themselves in a role where they ask for the certificate. And I have been a part of this exam for quite a lot of times now, and it's very effectively, because you can see when a person is staying there and present themselves, if there is a project manager, if there is an IT trainer, if there is a business manager, in the way they present themselves. After this oral exam, the examination board decided whether to pass or not pass. So after 10 minutes of discussing, you either have a certificate and you get a champagne, or you have something else. Here is another way of seeing, using, explaining the user framework. And earlier somebody also mentioned how useful this could be for the HR department. So let's look at it as a roadmap or a radar. What you do is to see the same framework in the wheel instead of other examples, and you see in the center you have plan, build and operate. And then we divide into 7 categories, and then you have the 21 profiles at the edge of the wheel. And why is this useful? And why do you need standardization of ICT competence? Well, it's obvious reasons. If you want to develop competence, what do you need then? You need a way to measure that competence. If you would like to measure competence, you will have to describe it. And if you would like to describe it, you need to define it. And that is why we need things like EUCIP as such. We need the same language to talk and to describe. Very often, I mean, although we are a little more people in Norway compared to Estonia, the IT field isn't that big. So I know a lot of people in the IT sector in Norway, and sometimes they come to me and ask, what requirement is there to get a EUCIP certification? Asking actually, if you compare, how high do I have to jump? Are you talking about 1 meter? Are you talking about 2 meters? Do you want me to say world record? What is the requirement? And in a need to define that, you have to describe and define and set a standard. And it's the same as jumping in ski jumping, but I don't know if there are so many experts in ski jumping in this room. But that will be the same. Is it 50 meters? Is it 150? Is it 200 meters? What is the requirement? Okay. I said I would say something about self-assessment. EUCIP already have a self-assessment tool. And to sort of give a contribution into the discussion of the competence framework, and also to see how useful a self-assessment tool could be based on the framework, CEPIS as such have done a survey in Europe the last half year or something, and they have asked the member organization to recruit their members to ask for in this survey. And what you do then is to answer, I think, approximately 50 questions about your deep competence skills. You see some of them mentioned here. And one of them is business strategy alignment. For every one of them you can click and you can give more details about what you mean about this competence. And then you measure yourself from none to excellent. And remember what I'm saying now, we're talking about the self-assessment tool. This is not a test. It's what you think about yourself and what you think about yourself. And the aims for the project is to provide picture of the competence of ICT practitioners in Europe today, and also to provide an individual profile report showing gap analysis against an ECF competence, and so on. This survey or this self-assessment tool is still available. So everyone who like to take the test or the self-assessment, please enter this URL and you are able to take the test. We have closed the survey for be able to give the presentation for the SEN work group in a month or so, I think. But that doesn't mean that you are able to take the self-assessment if you like, because the advantages of this could be like an example of this. You can refer to this as a measure of a competence in a country, in a company, or in Europe as a whole. What we will do is to present all the information we have for use for Europe as a whole, and you can benchmark each country together with that. And this is another example of why we need a framework and a standard and what you can get out of it. I mean, if the challenge is that we need a lot of business analysts, and when you measure the market we see that you don't have them, then we have a challenge. The same can be used in a company or whatever. So that is an example of how useful it is to have a standard. But then you will have to define to be able to measure. Everyone who take the self-assessment will also have a personal report, and it shows you, and then you recognize the 5 modules in ECF. You will be told your competence required by the present profile. So compared to each profile, you will see a radar. The green is where you are, where your competence required. The red is where your competence is too low. And it will be shown in every details according to the deep competence skill list. So this list could be delivered to a learning provider, university or whatever, and say in detail what kind of competence do I miss and what kind of courses do we need to be developed. Here is where you have, let's say, too much competence, although I don't think that is a problem. But anyway. Let me end to say something about support and partners, and of course it is important to have support and partners for a framework like this and how it is in Norway. Abelia, the Business Association of Norway, Norwegian Knowledge and Technology-Based Enterprise, is supporting us, and I think that is a sister organization to you. And their leader says EUCIP is a common language for describing skills, and we strongly recommend that your members start speaking this language. Another similar organization in Norway is ICT Norway, called the Voice of Norwegian ICT. What Mr. Per Morten says about it, certainly there are a number of certifications for specific products, but the general competency standard has been sorely missed. So they support us 100%. Another, before I end, example, because very often people ask me, Is there a competition here? Is there other frameworks or standard for certification which are better or whatever? And especially they asked this vendor-oriented certification programs like Microsoft. And I think we're more talking about that they go together rather than that they're competitors. An example is Mr. Tom Seierstad, Ole Tom, which is the Chief Security Advisor in Microsoft Norway, well known as a specialist in security all over the world actually. He said that he would like to sponsor 4 candidates from their partners to certify them for security advisor. And why do Microsoft go to EUCIP and ask for that? I mean, they have plenty of security certificates. They have a bunch of it. The reason why is that Ole Tom Seierstad said, we need to prove their skills as objective, independent and neutral in the market. Microsoft certificate proves that they know Microsoft product well, and that is, of course, very valuable and good for customers of their consultancies. But they also need a way to prove that they have the behavior skills as a security advisor, and that should be measured in an objective, neutral, and independent way. So Microsoft and EUCIP go very well together in Norway, as an example. Yeah. I think that was all.
Thank you. Questions, please.
Wait for the microphone so everyone else can hear your question. The question is always the best.
Yep. Thank you for presentation. How often do you change this content of the self-assessment lists? How often you overview all these requirements and skills and etc.?
You mean you change the questions?
Yes. Yes, in this self-assessment test.
We don't change them at all because the framework is there and we based all the questions on the framework.
Yeah, but during the time the technology changes or...
That's a good question. Like I said, the question is the best. It gives me the chance to tell that EUCIP framework or the ECF is more based on generic competence rather than vendor-like or system-like competence. So that means that this specification lasts much longer than half a year or a year. So that there is no need for change every month or year or something like that. The EUCIP framework has been fully defined the last 2 years, and I think it will stay for the next 2 years too. Because, for example, we ask for competence like operating system, not a specific operating system, but in general. The example from Microsoft also proves that, of course, when Microsoft is giving out a new version of their product, they need to change the certification scheme. That is not necessary for EUCIP. Was that a kind of an answer for your question? Or?
Yes.
Thank you for the presentation. I would like to get a bit of more information how this competence framework is related to the study processes in the Norwegian universities. Are these standards somehow one source for curricular development? What is the general view in Norway, how the enterprises and universities have to work together?
Another good question. And I could be a little bit kind of a personal in that matter because I am a, what do you call it, adjunct lecturer myself in one of the universities in Norway, actually one of the only private university, the School of Management. And I talk to the professors every day, so to speak. And please don't misunderstand me. I don't want to step on any toes, but to have a professor change their syllabus is really hard. So my experience is that they recognize the syllabus, they use the syllabus, but I don't call it EUCIP. Because they acknowledge that these core 3 modules really cover the field of an IT, what do you say, in the meaning of core level, basic competence. This is what EUCIP require for EUCIP professional, that everyone, no matter the profile, should know about. Little bit about how to plan, little bit how to build, little bit how to operate. You should know a little bit about ETIL and service level agreements and stuff. You should know a little bit about the good old, and that's why we don't have to change it all the time. What do you call this? IEEE standard with this 7th level of... can somebody help me? Oh. Yeah. That has been the same almost since I started my career in 75. And you should know a little bit about programming, although not a specialist. You should know a little bit about what project managers are dealing with, although you're not a project manager yourself. So they recognize that the syllabus is solid based, and they use it, but they don't call it EUCIP.
But basically you're saying that universities are autonomous to use it, but how they actually do it, it's actually their call. But the graduates more or less do have these competences the labor market is expecting them to have.
Yes. There is also something, I think, the leader of Norwegian or EUCIP Norway examination board is a professor in the university I'm talking about. And he said there is a very good distinction between a diploma and a certificate. A diploma proves that you hold the skills. A certificate proves that you are able to use it. And he said that he lives very well in these 2 roles. Because if you go back to the pilot again, you ask the competence for a pilot, would you like to acknowledge their education or their experience? And I would say both. So I hope you understand what I mean. But when the universities now start to develop new bachelor program, they look into EUCIP profiles. So I have a little bit more work to do to have them to call their bachelor study EUCIP business analyst, for example. But maybe if I be invited here back in 2-3 years, maybe I can tell you that. Please.
I have one question. ECF is quite young, still in development. EUCIP has been in place for about 2 years. Are these mature enough for Estonia example to use, or should we wait till it matures?
It's a good question. If I start with the short way to say it, it's mature enough, plenty mature enough. Another way to say it is that there is a play called Waiting for Godot, I think. I am extremely occupied with gadgets. I always have the new versions of mobile phones and everything. And you can always wait until next year to have the even better one. But I think it's better to start, and I'm happy that Norway was so early out, because the experience of using it is also valuable. So I would say the pilot is ready to take off and the plane is safe.
I disagree a little bit. Not to change this questionnaire, actually, because this new technologies in behavior, more precisely. If you mentioned about the telephones, about the technologies as a Skype or MSN, those are new technologies, and they are developing quite rapidly. You agree that? And on that area, the questionnaire can be old. How the attitude to this, for example, in some cultures, still the usage of MSN or something like that is prohibited. But in some cases, it's even you don't know about the colleague, nothing but just maybe a Skype address. That's all. But you are cooperating and do very good maybe business in games, software, or somewhere else. But still, in that case, the behavior is totally different.
Well, I don't disagree with you, but let me first refer that to the question Silm brought up. That is at least not a reason to wait until tomorrow to implement it, because that challenge will be more and more a challenge. Do you understand? Secondly, of course, you're right. There is fields here where things move very fast. You mentioned one example. Another example is insecurity. I mean, that is a place where things move very fast. There is always a new virus or a new technology to take money out of your bank account. But I feel that the way EUCIP framework is described, there is no problem to mention these detailed skills when you are going to the oral exam, and then you use your musical ear, so to speak, to see if the candidate is up to date with the detailed skills in the used technology. So I feel that the framework is good enough to cover the development in most areas as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.